And we have 2 icebreakers tonight. And the icebreaker is my favourite of all the speeches. Because I think everyone has a wonderful story, unique and insightful. And some orator who was who was highly commended on the speech he gave, said, well, my speeches are my life, so that's the way it is. So the objective of the icebreaker is to begin speaking before an audience and to discover speaking skills you already have and skills that need some attention. And the time is 4 to 6 minutes. And the first speaker tonight is James O Doherty.
Toastmaster, Cordia. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. The man in black raised making an introduction into a real art form when he said, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." I don't want to make an art form tonight, but what I would like to do is invite everybody to come with me on a journey that starts, as Paul Gannon said, in the middling Midlands, which I dispute, of course, and ended up here in the wonderful west coast of Ireland. And I hope I get to the west coast, because Mary Carr told me this afternoon that she started something like that at her icebreaker and got as far as 6th class, I think. In any case, my story starts in the Hospital of the Blue Sisters in Carlow, in the edge of the Pale. One of the first places to become anglicised actually in Ireland, back in 1,000 years ago now. So the whole kind of Irish culture in many ways died out very early in that part of the world. Even though for years and years we continued to fight, and as not many people know, but 1798 was very bloody in Carlow. And as part of my childhood, I was brought from the Hospital of St. Bridget's in Carlow home to a house in the square in Tullow, where the Joseph Tullow took Father Murphy and stretched his body upon a rack. And as a kid, I used to play on this statue to Father Murphy. And then we moved into Carlow town, which was like a huge metropolis, to move from Tullow into Carlow, the edge of the Pale. And every year, going to school there, all the schools used to gather once a year and cross to really wild country into Great Cullen, which is in Laois, and cross the Barrow, where they eat their young without salt. But there was a large croppy grave, where all the croppy boys in 1798 who had been slaughtered on the streets of Carlow were buried in a mass grave, and quicklime thrown on top of them. I talk about this because that was very much in my consciousness growing up. Not that we were particularly Republican or hung up on it, but it was very much part of our life. And we talked, one of the topics today was about how times have changed in terms of what people see on television. We grew up in single channel land. But I find that my kids, I'll talk about them later on, what kind of ages they're at, but they have no idea of that kind of history that was very much part of our life growing up. And I think part of it was we were in national school in 1966, which was 50 years after 1916. And people are looking at the centenary coming up in the not too distant future. And that was a big deal for all of us too. Again, not in a very nationalistic way, but it was the first time that actually, as 8-year-old, we learned in class to recite proclamation. Irish men and Irish women, you of the dead generations, and all that. In any case, we had a great lifetime in Carlow growing up. It was a lovely town to grow up in. And one of the strange things that I find in my life, my dad came from Donegal. With a name like O Doherty, you can possibly come to that conclusion. And my mother came from North Kerry, and that was a strange mixture. So we covered Ulster, Munster, and Leinster, and I ended up in Connacht. And as a friend of mine who had access to the tickets to Croke Park in the old days when banks had those kind of things, he said to me, "You can go to this game because there's surely somebody there that you can support and take a connection with." And there usually was, I have to say. Over the years, we enjoyed Carlow, and in 1971, I was packed up and sent off to Tipperary to get an education, to Rockwell College. It's a place with a lot of probably well-known people came through it. De Valera in these early days, President Hillary, and of course his great rugby school. I didn't play rugby, wasn't much good at it. So my claim to fame is, and Joe, you had experienced this over the years. I played on the first soccer team that came out of Rockwell and played in the Munster Soccer Cup. We went up to Limerick and we got trashed by a young team from Limerick who, you know, grew up playing soccer from the minute they could kick a ball or could walk. That brought me through the middle of the 70s, and then I moved to UCD, to Dublin, which at that time we felt was the smallest town in Ireland. You couldn't go anywhere but you meet somebody who knew you, and particularly if you got into trouble, the story was told before you got half a chance to even think about it. I went to an interesting college. I did an engineering degree in Merrion Street, right in the city centre, in what is now the Tshirts office. And I remember at night time, if we stayed a bit too late, we were thrown out because the army took control of it, because it had a view back into Dáil Éireann. And so it was taken over every evening. And there were some strange stories, not that I took part in them, of guys breaking in looking for things that they left behind that they felt they needed really urgently, and being accosted by armed guards on the corridors and what have you. The other thing, if you're ever looking at speeches from the steps of the Taoiseach's office, there's a guy on the statue above the door, and when you were going in to sit an exam, he's sitting there like this looking down at you. I can tell you he wasn't uplifting, he was going to say, now you're in for a buddy. I came out of UCD in 1979, and I started working in a semi-state job in Dublin in 1980. It was the Institute for Industrial Standards, which is now kind of part of Sustainable Energy Ireland, the section I worked for at the time. And we talk about a recession now, but in 1981, particularly as a young graduate starting off, times were tough. It really was hard to see how you could have any money at the end of the week. And I had a friend who had started a job up in Cavan with the installation people up there, and he was looking for a rise. He knew where I was working. He phoned me to say, how much are you making? Because my boss said I got to run around and see who's making any kind of money before he gave me a rise. So he managed to do a survey of the half dozen of us that had jobs in Ireland at the time. And I said, I'll tell you how much I'm getting if you come back and tell me how I'm doing. And the saddest thing of all was I was doing one of the best, and I couldn't make ends meet. And I was a single guy on my own. You know, at the time of 1981, when you think about it, the time of the hunger strikes, the time of 3 elections, and really didn't look like there was much future in the country. So I packed up and went off to Calgary, Alberta, which was a very different type of environment to go to. I remember still arriving on the aeroplane, and it banked around the airport coming into Calgary. And all I could see, because it banked really on 3 sides, all I could see was empty prairie. And I blessed myself and said, what have I left myself in for here? But Calgary turned out to be a very interesting town. It was a town of, at that time, about 750,000 people. And it was a boom going on. But just when I arrived, I don't know what I did, but it stopped. It was the end of one of the first oil booms in 81. And it's interesting now because at that time they were just starting to do oil sands, extract oil from heavy sands. And commercially it just wasn't making it because the cost was too high. And the price of oil had actually dropped so that the economics didn't work. Nowadays, it's become a very much big business in northern Alberta because the cost plus the dependency on oil, or the independence of Canada in maintaining its own oil supply, has really come to the fore. I spent a number of years, 7 years in Canada. They were very interesting times. I got a job with a small engineering company, and they got taken over by a very, very large French-Canadian company. They said to me, would you like to move to Montreal? I didn't realise that at that time, but Montreal is a French-speaking country, a city, completely. And the company that had bought us was a French-Canadian company. And the project was an aluminium smelter way up in northern Quebec where nobody speaks English. It's like going to the Gael. But I asked my boss, who was an Englishman, born in the town of Beer, which he always claimed was his main claim to fame, did he think I should go? And he said, can you say 50 in French? And I said, 50. You can go, you can speak, you can buy. I didn't figure that one out until I got down there, and I found out the favourite French Canadian beer is 50. So I survived, but not too long actually, because the company I joined, or the project I joined, got canned after about 6 months, and last in, first out. So I found myself back in the prairies again, and we moved a few of us to Vancouver. We think we emigrated from Carlow to Vancouver. Billy Miles, who has Ballina roots, but he's a Kerry man really, born and reared, but his father was from Ballina, was with me when we emigrated, and he drove from Calgary to the coast. And I don't know if anybody has done that trip. Fantastic scenic trip, but Billy's comment when we got to Vancouver was, if we told them at home that we're after driving for 15 hours and 1,000 miles or whatever it was, and we didn't see enough ground to grow a potato in, they wouldn't believe us. Because it's all mountain and river, and as I said, beautiful, beautiful scenery. That brings me up to coming to Westport, which is a topic for another day.
Icebreaker now, James Doherty's icebreaker will be evaluated by Mayor Carr.
Fellow Toastmasters, and especially James. We love icebreakers in this group because it introduces us to people who have just joined us, and we love to hear about their lives. And the title of James's icebreaker was My Journey Through Life. And he certainly, everybody's life is a journey, but James certainly gave us his journey in that he was in so many different places. And I thought, I loved his speech generally anyway, but I loved the fact that he gave us so much detail about each place that you were in. You started in Carlow, and you had a lovely sense of history about Carlow. We heard about Father Murphy. And then you went on to Rockwell, and the only thing I really knew about Rockwell was that my children went to a thing called Camp Rockwell one time, and that was one of the first of these summer camps that used to be on, and they used to have great fun down there. And then you went up to UCD, and I loved the humour that you put into your speech there about your time when you were in what is now the Taoiseach's office, and the goings on at that time. And you went then from there off to Canada, and we heard all of you gave us great detail about your experiences in Canada and the workplace and how hard it all was. And eventually you came back to Westport. I really enjoyed your sense of humour, the fact that you could come out here for your very first speech and be so relaxed. You used no notes, and you looked at your audience and you took them all in very confidently. And I think you have a great future as a speaker, James. Certainly look forward to the rest of your speeches. Now, we're supposed to give you a pointer, and the pointer I would say would be that you should have given us maybe a longer, you seem to just cut yourself off. You went a little bit over time, and then you certainly cut yourself off, so your conclusion was a bit brief. So I'd say in future, try and have a longer conclusion. They say in a way you should sort of sum up what your speech was about when you get to your conclusion, and then finish off. But thank you very much, James. Enjoyed your speech.